Record. Okay. Boker Tov, everybody. Nishmat Avigdor Chai Avram ben Ner Tzvi Rachalea. Also, I'd like to dedicate today during Shiva to my late sister-in-law, Bat Yechaya Bat Alevi. Tov. We are in the small printing on page 120 and begins with the words Hasheni Hu Hasimcha. It's a good title for today. We're talk about Simcha. We're going to talk about Simcha and Kin'ah, at least, and maybe Kavanah, which is the topic of joy, zealousness, which we'll see the difference between zealousness and jealousy soon. And then, if we get to it, also the concept of Kavanah and proper thought and intention. Let's say it's 500 years from now, and you come across an article from 500 years before, from this time period. And it's kind of like blurry. And you see that the topic is Yom Ha'atzmaut, and the topic is Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut. And you see there are people talking that say, not only don't say Hallel, you should be saying Tachanun, another saying you should be saying Hallel with a bracha, some of that. And like, you have no idea the context. Okay, Yom Ha'atzmaut has been celebrated for 500 plus years now, but what's this whole business of with a bracha, without a bracha? What's this business of you should say Tachanun? What? We're page 120. So until you put it into context, you don't really understand what the dispute is. Give you an example from the Gemara. Okay, let's say, for example, we're talking about the issue of muktzah. Now we all know that certain things on Shabbat have different levels of muktzah. That you cannot muktzah doesn't mean you can't touch it. It means you can't move it. So you can touch a car Shabbat. I'm not recommending it, but you can't. But there's different levels of muktzah. Things that are muktzah because they themselves are prohibited to use on Shabbat, sometimes because it's a mitzvah, the item like a throw on Shabbat of Chol HaMoed, all kinds of things. But it may surprise you to know that it's one of the few arguments in the Shas that I actually remember who says what. I don't usually keep those things in my head. It's Rabbi Yehuda and, oh my gosh, Rabbi Shimon, I believe it is. Whether we have the deen of muktzah or not, whether it's such a thing. You know, it's part of our lives for thousands of years, but there was a point where there was a dispute. Well, what was the reason for the dispute? So what was the context of that dispute? I'm not going to get into it now. But until you put it into context, sometimes it's hard to understand the reason behind something. Why am I mentioning all this? Moshe Chaim Luzzatto passed away in, I think it was 1746. I checked this morning. That's what I think. And you could check and let me know. And the Baal Shem Tov was in 1760 when he passed away, the year he passed away. They overlapped. Now, we know that Baal Shem Tov was the founder of Hasidut. And one of the major avenues of Hasidut was the concept of Simcha. And originally, again, for some of you, this is a repetition from something I said a little over a year ago when we entered Tanya. One of the reasons that there was a large amount of people that were against Hasidut, called mitnagdim, right? Be neged something. Today they call it Hasidim misnagdim. They don't have the same connotation anymore because they felt that, put it in context, it was a terrible thing. What was the context? That just within the past 100 years, there are two false messiahs, right? There was the Shabtai Tzvi and Yaakov Frank, both who turned out, Shabtai Tzvi who converted to Islam and died in prison or whatever it was, and Yaakov Frank, who again was another one of those who became I remember his name because that was the name of the rabbi of the shul for 30 years before I became rabbi. I grew up with him. I remember learning about it, I said, whoa, and now I'll never forget that name. So when they saw the Baal Shem Tov have this different approach, it's not heavy, but it's about simcha and joy. Oh, here we go again. Of course, we know that it became a very large, important movement within in Judaism, and very often it's hard to even distinguish anymore, besides clothing, between where Hasidut and Mitnagdim will overlap very often. The idea of a Karlbach minyan is right. That's not a Hasidish kind of a background, but it's about joy and it's about music, it's about singing. And there's some places where you go to daven that you think that they just had a pogrom 5 minutes ago, right? So there's different approaches in Judaism, and elu ve'elu divelikim chayim. So why am I mentioning all this? Because this next section here, I can't tell you that he was influenced or not by the Baal Shem Tov. I have no idea. But again, they lived at the same time. They overlapped, and the concept of Hasidut was already being born. Keep in mind that the Ramchal himself was on the run, was chased because he was seen to be a heretic for some reason, because he was trying to give Kabbalistic ideas. He was run out of Genoa, I think it was. I don't remember the names. And eventually, the book that we're learning was not popular when he was alive. It was almost 100 years after he died before it really became well known, because we saw Salanter, the founder of the Muslim movement. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is the reason, is that this next, we just have like 2 paragraphs on the topic of Simcha. Because I think personally, because it's such a very big part of what might be a way to improve one's life and connect to Hashem, I'm wondering kind of out loud here, and I haven't done any research on this, to what extent, if any, he was influenced by the Baal Shem Tov. Was it something like, okay, I got to mention Simcha, because it really is important, but I don't want to go too deeply into it, because there are all these people out there that really don't like this man, the Baal Shem Tov, and all this concept of Simcha. We got to maybe I'll tone it down. So personally, every time I've gotten to this section of the book, I'm surprised that it's a short section. Contrast that with the Baal HaTanya. He has multiple chapters on life of Simcha. And it was also all the same time period, also the 1700s, was his yahrzeit, yes, the Baal HaTanya, yes.
But in the same area.
Correct. They're different areas, right? Because Ramchal was in Italy eventually, and the Baal Shem Tov was in Volhynia. I can't remember the name of the city. And who else did I mention? Baal Shem Tov was in. I just want not mention Bunch. That was his student. No, I'm talking about the Ramchal. The Baal Shem Tov was in. Remember? Oh man. Okay. Well, we're all forgetting. It's okay. Good. I feel good company then. You do a quick search and let me know. Okay. So let's talk about Simcha. Let me just ask you in a word, what would Simcha be to you? What would be joy? What would bring you joy? Okay. Besides the big chocolate cake or an extra hour of sleep, what else could bring joy? Any takers? Grandchildren. Excellent. You should start with grandchildren, right?
Of course, the wife.
Of course, the wife. Okay, Nira. That's right. I'm going to forward this afterwards to Nira. Don't worry about it. Grandchildren. What else? What make people happy in life? A wedding. Good. So what's the difference between a grandchildren? That sounds like a joke, but it's not. What's the difference between wedding and a grandchildren? Wedding is fleeting. It's a few hours. And even if it's your own child or grandchild, it's a few hours. And there's the afterglow and all, but it passes. Grandchildren, it's permanent, hopefully. It is something that's part of your life. Okay. It could be, like I say, look, there are other types of sleep could bring you joy. What's that? A vacation could give you joy. There's a lot of recovering is also a good thing, right? From the cruise, right? Okay. When I was you're going to see the connection, but I may have told the story before. When years and years ago, I heard a speaker come to shul. Actually, I became the rabbi, but I grew up in the shul, so it was before I was a rabbi. I was already married, and the speaker she came into the shul, was speaking to the audience, and said, she started by, whom do you love? Yeah, hands went up. My father, my mother, my sister, my brother, my children, my spouse, all these things. And there are probably at least 100 people in the audience. Not a single person's hand ran up and said, God. Not one, right? So if I've asked this question, what brings joy to people, 100% of the time is these answers that I get. And that's fine. That's normal. Because we tend to think about ourselves in a gashmi way, in a physical way, what brings you joy. But also what brings people joy, it should bring joy, is the fact that we have Avinu Shabbat. We have Hashem, who's, no matter what, is always there for us. And that we want to serve Hashem, Idut Hashem, b'simcha. We have 2 competing psukim. One says, Idut Hashem b'simcha. He quotes that right here at the beginning. We'll come to it in a minute. Serve Hashem with joy. And there's another one that says, Gilu ba bir adab. You also should be like trembling before Hashem. I'll tell you a story about that in a second, that phrase. So it's a little bit of both. We're a little bit of we have a dual personality. We have to serve Hashem out of joy and simcha, and we're going to see more in depth at the moment. But it's not to the point where we're losing our minds. We go like, we have to understand that there's reverence before whom you stand. Before whom you stand. So actually, I'm not going to tell the story. Forget it. It's not appropriate for today. I'll go like, what was the story? I'll tell you some other time. Anyways, let's take a look at after all this babbling, look at the text. Hashenihu, the second part. Remember, there are three parts to this idea of Ahavat Hashem. The first one, excuse me, had to do with dveikut, clinging to God. Now we're going to talk about simcha. That simcha should bring one closer to Hashem, also as far as the love of God. Huikar gadol ba'avodah. Now, he does have some influence here for the Baal Shem Tov. He says it's a fundamentally important, big part of service of God. Umasha David Mazhir Omer is what David HaMelech warns and says, Ivdu et Hashem besimcha, bo lefanav bir nana. So you serve God with joy, come before Him with happiness, song. He also says, Tzadikim yismechu ya'alzu lifnei Elokim yasisu besimcha. Again, another idea of the multiple expressions or uses of joy. Right? There's aliza, there's simcha, there's all kinds of things, and each one has a different connotation. Let me finish the sentence and I'll tell you an interesting thing in davening you may never have caught. And it's Gemara and Shabbat tells us that the Shekhinah, the divine presence of Hashem, only rests among those who are in simcha because of doing a mitzvah. Now that might sound like, wait, I'm not putting my tefillin, I'm not doing Shabbat Challah at the moment, so I guess the Shekhinah can't be here. It's not true. What is the mitzvah? It doesn't mean a specific mitzvah only. When we're serving Hashem by living a Torah life, that's a mitzvah, right? Know God in all your ways. Everything you do, when you act, everything your decisions, as long as they're based on Torah, that's a mitzvah. Not in the classic sense of the 613, like don't steal, you shouldn't do this, you should do that, but you're serving Hashem. In Shabbat morning, let me see if I can do this from memory. Hold on a second. Do you mind just bring me a Siddur? It doesn't make a difference. Ashkenaz, Sfarad, Taimani, it doesn't make a difference. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay. Except for this, just so. Okay. Sometimes these things just pop in my head, so I want to make sure I say it the right way here. Whoops. Go further. Here you go. There we go. Okay, this awkward silence. It's great. Great. Unless he was, that's correct. That's also true. It's funny you say that, because on this Project 929, parak a day during the weekday, just came to the one section where Shaul loses his Ruach HaKodesh in a sense, and it's suggested he should have someone play music for him so he can get so okay. We say here on Shabbat morning in Keladon, Semechim b'tzeitam, sasim, or I say sasim bevoam. They go out b'simcha, talking about the angels, and they come back. They go out with b'simcha, and they come back with sason, right? Different levels of joy. Oh man, we're disconnected to the Sheva Brachot. Okay, good. I'll continue and figure out later. I'm going to say, never mind. I'm going to ask the court reporter to please strike that from the record. We're going to continue now. I know what I'm actually have to say, but it's only halfway there. So I'll send you a message later. I only have to look up. I'm sure Joel's is looking like, what's wrong with him today? Am I right? Okay. Great that this is recorded too. Awesome. Okay. Regarding the pasuk you just mentioned, that you should serve Hashem with joy. Amru b'midrash. Amar Rabbi Aibo kishetiyah umed leitpalel. Rabbi Aibo said, when you get up to daven, yehi libcha sameach alecha. You should be joyous. Shata mitpalel elokim she'en kayotzei bo. He says the basic fundamental joy you should have is there's someone you can turn, someone in quotes, you can turn to. Hashem is always there to turn to, always. Ki zoti ha-simcha amitit. That is the true simcha. She'eh libo shel adam alez al shehu zocheh la'avod lifnei adoni parach. That a person has, it should be joyous. From the word alez, aliza, same word. That he is the zechut to serve God. She'en kamo, there's none like Hashem. V'lasok b'torato v'mitzvotav, and to deal with and act and work and do his mitzvot and his Torah. Shema shleimut amiti. That is the true complete concept. Hayakar hanitzchi, and that which it's permanent, it's forever. When a person does an aveira, do a sin, we know that if they do tshuva, one of the ways that Hashem works, so to speak, is that the sin gets wiped off the record. It's gone. Keilu didn't exist. That never, ever, ever happens with the mitzvah. No matter how bad a person might be, the worst Rasha number, how you want to determine Rasha and how you want to define it. If they did a mitzvah, then they get rewarded for it. And that reward is that mitzvah lasts lanetzach. It always helps them in Hashem's book, so to speak. Hold me after you, and I will run. Bring me to the king, to his room. The closer you can get to the inner sanctum, so to speak, to Hashem, the greater the joy will be. And how much more so his heart will be overflowing and he'll be joyous. This is the idea I mentioned last week, where I gave you the choice. You can see this person you want to see. You can talk to him on the phone, meet him in the coffee shop, or go to their living room. This is the closer you are, the more intimate it is, the relationship with that person, the talking, the being with that person, the greater joy, the greater closeness you feel. So too with Hashem. There are people who feel very distant from Hashem. I've heard from, unfortunately, more than I can count, people saying Hashem hates me, Hashem's forgotten about me, he doesn't care about me. And on the other hand, I've heard plenty of people say Hashem loves me, which is great, okay? It's a mindset. And when things, like you said, this is exactly talked about last week. When things are not going well, that's where the real test, 2 weeks ago, so the real test of them not comes in, because it's easy to believe in God when things are going well. It's when they're not going well that makes it much more difficult. So he said the closer one is to Hashem, that the joy is increased. V'omer, it says in Tilim, Yismach Yisrael b'ma'osav, Israel should rejoice over its maker. B'nei Tzion yagil b'malkam, v'David shekvar higia lamala azot shiur gadol. David HaMelech, who reached such a great height in this area of simcha b'Hashem, said, Yerav alav sichi, anochi esmach b'Hashem. Basically, the idea that all my conversations are sweet and all about Hashem. One of the psukim that David, it says in Tilim, it says that David was not embarrassed when he was sitting among other kings of other nations to talk about God. Now, what does that even mean? Now, number one, it meant that there was this constant joy in his heart that he wanted to have this vekut and have the simcha of Hashem. But what happens, unfortunately, for people, and I'm not talking about kings, I'm not talking about just the average Jew. I'm going to prove it to you about what I'm about to say, is they don't talk enough about Hashem. I'll prove it. Imagine you go back to whatever city you are from where you made Aliyah. And how's life? How's things going? How are things in Eretz Yisrael? How are things going in Israel? And you say, well, it's great. It's not the easiest life, but Baruch Hashem, it's great. And you know what? I feel so much closer to Hashem. Just try that phrase. To the average guy standing in the supermarket. Okay. Sure. Right? I actually started to use a phrase. I don't use it anymore because I saw the reaction. I said, I'm becoming such a Baruch Hashem. I could feel myself becoming a better Eved Hashem. You should have seen the looks I got, except from one guy, a Swedish guy who, he really connected to that statement. But other than that, look at you from the moon. Why? Because it's not what we talk about. We talk about Parshat Shavua, we talk about Tilim, we talk about Shiurim, no, Hashem. We leave Hashem out of the equation. So by doing that, we are, in a sense, distancing ourselves just a little bit without mentioning Hashem. And I don't mean about Baruch Hashem and Yirtz Hashem, Ezrat Hashem, Inshallah. Okay, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the idea of actually inserting Hashem into the equation. And that's what David HaMelech did, no matter what. And that's one of the things we learned, and that brings simcha as well. Va'omer, Va'avo al mizbach Elokim el simchat gili v'odcha bechinor Elokim Elokai. Again, this gives us a couple and one more. Teranena svatai ki azavra lach v'nafshi asher padita. These psukim, again, you see the different expressions. Simcha, gila, renana, azmira. All these are different expressions of joy. That's why in the last of the Sheva Brachot, it says Gila, Rina, Ditza, Chedva, Ahava, Achva, Shalom, and Re'u are all, by the way, how does Shalom fit in there? That's not an expression of joy. Everything else is, right? Even the Re'ut is an expression of joy of friendship. I'll let you think about that, but not now. Think about it a different time. And then you come up with something to say, Sheva Brachot, see? By the way, if you're ever asked to say Dvar Torah for something, whether it's Parshat Shavua, for Sheva Brachot, or something else, one of the things I found over the many years of speaking is always look for something that just kind of pops out as being out of the ordinary or out of a pattern. As I've mentioned this many times in Tefillah, especially, but in Parshat Shavua, in something, you have a list like, I have a friend, I have a student actually. Her email address, this is years ago when almost everyone used AOL. Her email address was ybnormal132@aol.com. I have never forgotten that because it's mix it up a little bit. So when you see something like that, wait, well, that stands out, right? So again, the word shalom doesn't seem to fit in that pattern. Same thing, we have this all over the place. It's not b'mikra, it's purposefully done. And from there, you can always build on that. Okay, back to here. V'hainu, ki kol kach hayta mitgaberet b'kirbo hasimcha, that the joy in his heart internally grew to such an extent that his lips, David HaMelech's lips, would move on their own. They would just automatically be going with Simcha Bar Hashem. As he did anything, he did a mitzvah, he did the davening. It's supposed to be moving anyways, but his lips would automatically, it was like on autopilot. It was so important to him, this expression of joy. Nafsho, it came from the extreme intensity of his neshama. That means he was like on fire, right? Lehitlahet, that's lahat rihut, of the joy that was involved in. If you mentioned the Sefer vacation, okay? If you all picture in your mind, you don't say anything, where you would love to go on vacation for a week, all expenses paid, no, everything's covered 100%, right? You think about that. Think about the moment you get this, okay, you're going to go. The joy, the anticipation, the landing. Don't be like me. I used to be like, you finally land at someplace, go, oh man, I only have 7 days left. No, wait, because my parents would always say, when I go to, a couple of times I went to an amusement park, or Kittyland, which doesn't exist anymore. I love a shalom, right? I'd be on one ride. It's true. I see that as my personality, at least back then. I'd be on one ride. I'd be looking at the next ride. Okay, what am I going to do there next? My parents would say, just enjoy what you're doing right now. Okay, that was my personality, very much so. In hindsight, I can see that. But picture that vacation, and like you want to just every second. You don't even want to almost go to sleep because you're going to miss that sunrise. You're gonna miss that. That's FOMO. Your FOMO, fear of missing out, right? So this is what he's talking about. Lahavdil. He was this constant, consistent relationship with Hashem that he didn't want to miss anything, and he was just excited the whole time. Umashasiyem is what he finished by saying, "V'nafshi asher padita, my soul which you have redeemed." Matzino shenitraim kadosh baruch hu. Now I'm going to read a pasuk because in Torah. Let me read it. And let me explain it. Okay, I'm going to translate this first into English, and then I'm going to explain it. We see that Hashem was upset, was angered with Israel, that they were lacking this condition in their service of God. It says in the pasuk, because you did not serve God with joy and happiness. Now, first, let's put that pasuk into context and understand why it is very difficult to understand this pasuk. It sounds simple enough. No, Hashem's not happy with you because you didn't daven with kavanah, or you just did through the motions. Okay, there's no simcha in your life. But let's put this into context. Anyone know where this pasuk is? What's going on around this pasuk? The tochacha. You don't keep the Torah mitzvah. This is going to happen. This horrible thing is going to happen. This is a horrible thing. Oh, and among all those psukim, you know why? Because you didn't serve Hashem with joy. So that sounds like it means like I'm putting up a mezuzah, I'm not going, yes, I'm putting up a mezuzah. That God forbid these things, the Torah horrible things, the tochacha, the bechukotai, and in no, bechukotai and kitavo. They're all going to come happen because I didn't nail the nail in properly with joy. God forbid. So there's the Balatanya has an amazing part of Tanya on this one pasuk. He parses it multiple ways to show all different meanings. I'm going to just give you one simple one that's not the one that he mentions. I don't, maybe he may mention with this one. This is the only one I've ever heard personally from a bunch of people. Look at the pasuk. The way I read it is as follows: because you didn't serve your God Hashem with joy and happy heart. Now let's read it differently. Because you didn't serve Hashem, and that brought you simcha and tuv levav. It was you were joyous to not serve God. That already is going to the other extreme. It's one thing if you don't have a joy when you're doing a mitzvah. It's bad enough. But to be joyous that you're not doing a mitzvah or that you're doing an averah, that's antithetical to what Hashem wants in this world. Does that also mean that you deserve all those things in the Torah? Of course not. It's a piece of it. But what is the tachlis? What is the bottom line of that pasuk? Is that when we do a mitzvah, especially those that we do frequently, it takes a little bit more effort sometimes to get to that level of, wow, I get to do this mitzvah and to stop and to think. That's why there's certain ones that you'll find. Actually, some say you should do it for every mitzvah, but I don't. That there's this idea whether it's Ashkenazi, it's hineni muchanim zuman. I'm prepared to do the mitzvah to get you to focus and to do out of joy. And by Sfaradim, it's l'shem yichu kuchabrichu. A similar idea, though, that you're doing the mitzvah for yourself on behalf of Am Yisrael, and it's also to connect to Hashem. It's supposed to make you focus. And like, why are we doing these things? If you were to go to Boulder, Colorado, I don't know why I pulled that out of the air. Anyone know here's from Boulder, right? Okay, you go to Boulder, Colorado, and you find yourself sitting on a bus next to some person who's a devout Christian. Let's just say, stop. You start asking questions, right? And so, can I ask you a question? Yeah, sure. Okay, and you're internally going, no, please don't ask me. Please don't ask me. I don't want to get to religion. Can you tell me, I know that the Jews don't do X or the Jews do Y. Can you explain to me why? Right? So, and it's not because they want to catch you and they want to try to convert you. They just want to know. The average person will not, unless it's like black and white. Why don't we eat, chametz on Pesach? And most people can say, look, because it's reminiscent of the fact that they didn't have the time for the dough to rise, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. And we are in a chipazon, we are rushed to get out. But when they get a little bit more beyond shitchi or surface, you start to I don't know, this is what we were always told to do. Okay. Now, on the one hand, there's one thing about being a drone that just follow with everybody else and just do what you're told to do. At a certain age, that's the way you teach. I'm just, it's hard to tell a 4-year-old, or 5-year-old why certain things are done. They can already understand at 4 years old easily why we make a bracha. They can't understand the big concept of Hashem, but there's an understanding there why we make a bracha. Let's try to remember to make a bracha. We don't want to put something in our mouth without thanking Hashem. But as the list of things that we teach grows wider, it doesn't necessarily grow deeper. And we're not necessarily at a young age taught why. I'm going to just kind of divert for a second here because it does fit here. Come back to it. Last year, 2 years ago, within the last couple of years, I spoke on Shabbat Shuvah. It was actually, I can say it now also, it was based on a talk by Rabbi Gottlieb, Shlita, who is a magnificent speaker, teacher. And it was about Moshe Rabbeinu, about the pasuk that was in last week's parasha, in Shemot. No, this week. It says that when Moshe was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 when they went to talk to Paro. Like, okay, yeah, so what was his social security number? What was his shoe size? Like, he was 80 years old. What do you want to send him a birthday present? So the topic he talked about that I talked about was the concept of spiritual, I say Yotze la Pensia, retirement, the spiritual retirement. People get to a certain age that, okay, been there, done that. I read the Parsha before. I know what Rashi said. I spent my year in Israel. That's a nice one. I did my year in Israel because that's when I learned. That was my year. And I did 2 years. I did seminary or yeshiva. I did another year. I did my learning. Yeah. Without thinking that, because if you look at Moshe Rabbeinu up to 80, his resume is pretty thin. He's not the person that we came to know as Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader of Am Yisrael, the greatest Navi that ever lived. As I said in my sister-in-law's eulogy the other day, says it sounds like he's like turning 80. He's ready to, in Chicago, there's a place called Park Plaza. It's like Beit Tovei Ha'ir. This guy is like ready to move into Park Plaza and spend the rest of his life. That's what it sounds like there. You don't age, what's that? Yeah, well, they also have rental apartments there. Yes, my mom's there. It's a great place, by the way. As long as you're not there long term, that's the main thing. So it is age and where a person is in life is not a factor because you always, no matter you know who's patur from learning Torah? People who have passed away. If you're alive and you're conscious, I'm not saying this lighthearted. There's always a chiyuv to learn Torah. Doesn't matter if you're aged, doesn't matter if you're ill. Obviously, if there's certain factors that can't enable you to learn, that's one thing. Their mind's not there. I'm not talking about normal circumstances when there's not a health issue that prevents the learning. You're never patur from learning. Of course, you have to learn. And it doesn't mean to read the same thing another 100 times. It means to learn even more and deeper. That's what this is also about. How do we get to a level of joy in doing something that we do day in and day out? It's difficult. There's no question about it because it requires extra effort. So it sounds like a contradiction. You have to make an effort to be happy. Okay, it's now 4:00. Time to be happy. That's not what it means. But when you do this, make this, it's okay. I don't care. That sounds like someone's drilling. Somewhere in the building. Yeah. Okay. We'll be back after a commercial announcement. So how do you get there? Let's say, just take like for a guy who's going to put on tefillin, right? I'm putting on tefillin for whether it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 60 years. It's the same action physically every single day. Actually, mine did change. That's a different story. Okay, it's the same basic action, the same for years and years. All okay there? So how does that change? So does it mean, okay, maybe I should learn a little bit of halachot of tefillin? Maybe learn a little bit, maybe go see how they're made. Even go online, go to a factory that makes them, meet with the sofer, understand, maybe learn a little bit about the letters of the alphabet, how they're written for stamps, Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzot. They're written differently. Like, for example, the letter Chet is made of 2 Zions, right? So the Zion's a connection peak. The letter Aleph is a Yud and a Vav. There's a whole method in how the letters are made, and these are not the same letters we have in the Torah was given to us originally. Maybe learning something like that, something that makes you connect differently. Like, wow, that's really cool. I never knew that. How come there are 4 slots up here and only 1 box here? Because there's 4 parshiot and the same thing here. It's all learn more, understand more, get into, and even things that you have that you don't do. Even things you don't do because it's not your mitzvah to do. Learn about the kuhuna if you're not a kohen. Learn about tefillin if you don't put on tefillin. The more you do, and the more depth there is, not just surface. Surface is important to know how to accomplish something, right? I know, for example, if I tell someone you don't, and you get to a red light, in theory, at least it is so, you're supposed to stop, okay? You're supposed to stop. I know I'm a rabbit. It's crazy, okay? But why? No, don't, you stop at a red light. That's fine. That's very good. But why? Yeah, it's right. Now you have to stop at a yellow light also, okay? So why is that? Because, if I go through the red light, it could cause chaos, God forbid. So because of that, what I just showed you basically is, you stop at a red light, stop at a red light, but why? You have to understand the reason behind it. And that's just one little action of millions of actions we do in our lifetime. So when you talk about now, as far as mitzvot and connecting Hashem, what brings someone joy was I say, I didn't know that about that pasuk or about that davening or this halacha. That's so cool. Now, when I say that, there's a word, there's one single word that I have a few, but one specific one circled in my Siddur. It's the word ve'ata, and now, with an ayin, and now. And it connects to something I learned. So I have it circled, said, okay, and every time I get to that, I try. Just like focus for an extra millisecond on that word. That is very nice. It's something I learned about it. If you learn about something that you heard about tefillah, and you have your own siddur that you daven from, put a note in there. It could be a piece of paper, be write it on there, but make use of it. Make use of it. Continuing, v'David lefi sharaat Yisrael be'et hitnadvam abinyan habayit. Now, Bnei Yisrael came to David. They wanted to build the Beit HaMikdash. You know that they asked him. David was happy that they came to him about this. They reached this level that they wanted to connect with Hashem even more through a physical place. He davened about for them that they should remain at that level and shouldn't go away. It's easy to get excited about things. It's easy. Something new, something fresh, something, when you get, here's my phone, right? So when I got this one 2 years ago, I'm very, 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 very heavy phone user. They don't last long. I don't drop them a lot, but yeah, I know it's hard to believe. My wife says it should be surgically implanted into my hand. So when I first get the brand new phone, they're like, it's nice, it's clean, everything's fresh. Okay, I'm not going to add anything that don't need, right? Yeah, right. Okay, but to me now it's just my phone. The first few days you have to be a little extra careful with it. I got a new pair. My daughter gave me a gift of earbuds, the Bluetooth ones. They're great, and every time I use them, just the last week or so, thank you so much. These are great. I can sit before davening and listen to a little like jazz of learning something and all. Okay, but something that, after a few months, okay, put them in just to listen to the music or the shir or whatever it might be. Music. So we get used to things. And that's what the Navi talks about also. It says you don't want to be doing things milimuda. You don't want to do things just out of rote, R-O-T-E. You don't want to just do it over and over and over without thinking. And what gets you to think more is to spend some time learning about it. That helps. There are endless resources online. When Hashem showed Moshe Rabbeinu, we're going to read about this in a couple of weeks. It'll be Parshat Shkalim, believe it or not. It talks Hashem showed Moshe. It says in the Midrash, Rashi quotes it, a fiery coin. He says Zayitnu. This is what you have to give, because it says he kashem Moshe. Moshe was it was difficult for him to understand. What do you mean a half shekel? What is it? So he says you showed him a coin of fire. Why a fire? Just show him a coin, because just like fire can be good, destructive, and positive, it can burn something down or cook. So too, money can be destructive or positive. Same thing is true with what we do. We can take the same action, take the internet and use it for destructive purposes. We use it for positive. I'm telling you that there's so much good stuff out there. There really is a lot of junk and garbage. Absolutely. Just look at my YouTube channel. Sorry. There's a lot of junk out there, but when you use it for resources and you say, like, I want to know a little bit more about that mitzvah. I heard about hakel. What's hakel? We just had it in Chol Hamoed Sukkot. I don't know. You only get it once every 7 years. Well, maybe read up about it and come to it next time. Okay. Let me finish this paragraph. At least in my book, it's a paragraph. Those of you who are present today, I see you that are joyous to want to donate to him. Again, we say this every day also in Zion. I assume it's in Ashkenazi one also. I made it for yeah, it's also by Ashkenazim, because the ending is different. That's why I say that the idea being that to strengthen our hearts, ask Hashem to help us love Him better, to stay motivated, to stay with this level of simcha, this level of joy, and it feeds on itself. It really does. Sometimes you could be walking by somebody. I think I may given this example recently. You walk by somebody who's, walking like who was it, Linus in Peanuts, the one with the cloud over his head? No, that was Linus. I don't mean Linus. Who was the one with the pig pen? Right. Oh, this, like, and Charlie Brown, of course, is this everything goes wrong for him every time. Doesn't he ever think that Lucy's gonna? Does he really think she's actually gonna leave that football there for him to kick ever? Right? But you give a smile, a boker tov, something. It feeds on itself. And that's what this is about also, this concept of simcha, that when you start to incorporate that more into your life, it actually does spread. It spreads to you, of course, and then to others as well. That is helpful. Okay, I didn't get to Kina. We'll Bezrat Hashem do that next week. And we'll let you know next week we're here or Zoom or whatever it is. Okay, have a wonderful day.